Hi everybody, welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to take a look at analysis for OLAP, and it's going to continue on from the webinar delivered last week by my colleague Stephen McGee. Today we're going to look at analysis for OLAP to a deeper level than what was looked at last week. So let's get started. So I'll give a quick introduction to the BI team again. So the team is comprised of my colleagues Jeff Flynn, who's the BI lead, Stephen McGee, who is our functional analyst, Mark Shields, who's a BI architect, and Dominic Klopczynski, who's a BI developer. Now, the outline for today's session is as follows. So I'm just going to show you how to work with a lot of the tools that are available in analysis, most of which involve adding additional sheets and adding additional content to those sheets. So what we've looked at previously was just having a single standard table in a single worksheet in analysis. But you can add more tables or even charts into a sheet in analysis, and then you can add second and third and so on sheets, each with their own content. So I'll show you how to do that. I'll show you how you can what's called create a linked analysis. So if you have a table and a chart where if you change the table, the chart will change in tandem. I will also show you how you can use what's called focused analysis. So you're zoning in on certain areas of the data in a table, and your linked analysis will also update. I'll show you how you can set the properties to tables and charts, how you can delete an existing analysis from your sheet. As I mentioned, how you can add additional sheets, how you can turn off automatic updating, which is helpful if you're trying to do a number of changes in one go. So it saves time, and you'd obviously turn it back on then afterwards. When you're working with tables, I'll show you how you can swap the axes. So the rows becomes the columns and the columns becomes the rows. How you'd insert totals and subtotals, how you would format your measures, how you would suppress zeros, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, so hopefully sound-wise this is good for everybody. I'm just going to go back to the presentation, and hopefully there's to Global Meet, if it will respond to me, and I don't see any messages there, so I assume we're all good. If there are any issues, technical or otherwise, if you find my voice boring or if Global Meet crashes or whatever, let us know through the chat dialogue and we'll do whatever we can. Okay, so let's move on. So the first thing is to just go through a couple of definitions which might sound relatively basic, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands the basic concepts that I'm going to keep rattling on about today. So the first thing is what's called an analysis workspace. And like with an Excel workbook, the analysis workspace is your file. Within that file, you can have one or more sheets. Now, you have to have at least one, in the same way that an Excel workbook has to have at least one worksheet. Each sheet in analysis can contain up to 4 components. And when I say components, each one of those can be a table or a chart. And we refer to each table or chart as an individual analysis, or it could be a sub-analysis. Okay, so a sub-analysis is an analysis that's related to another analysis in your sheet. So you could have a table with a chart that's dependent upon the table. And if you change the chart, if you change the table, the chart will update to reflect that change. So I'll show you this in a while. It is also possible to break that relationship between the two, and again, I'll show you that. And then I mentioned a component. A component is really your table, of which there's one type, which is your cross-tab table, and you can have a choice of one of 14 types of charts. If your preferred type of chart isn't in that 14, well then, I'm not sure what we can do, I suppose. But anyway, let's move on. So the first thing I want to look at, and I'm going to go straight to analysis, and I've one that I prepared earlier. I'm actually going to show you a few other examples of analyses that I prepared earlier. So the one that we're looking at the moment just contains one, or sorry, I'll start again. It contains 3 sheets down here at the bottom in the same way that you'd see them in Excel. And on this sheet 1, we have one component, which is a cross table. This component is an analysis in itself. Now, if I go to this second file here, this second report, I have 2 components on this sheet 1. I have a table and I have a chart. And I can see from the heading of the chart that this is a sub-analysis. So if I was to change the table, the chart would also change. Now, I'm not going to change it just yet, but I'm just showing you that you can have multiple components. And when I say a chart, this chart is, there's a chart for each period that you see in the table. So period 1, I get this chart. Period 2, I get this chart. And then using this chap here, I can widen it, or I can move the range that I'm looking at. So now I'm looking at period 4 and 5, or 5 and 6. So I'm dragging this area here. Now I can widen it if I wish, but I'll end up with very small charts. Okay, another example of an analysis with multiple components is this guy here. Now, I think there's a lot of blue in this, but leaving the artistic merits over the side, we've a table with 3 charts. And I can tell, largely because I made it, these 3 charts are dependent upon that table. They're all sub-analyses to that table. Okay? Another thing that I'll point out is it's not in use on this particular sheet, but at the moment this report has 2 queries. The first is a transport query, the second is a commercial query. It is possible to have multiple queries in a document, and you create or you add new queries using this green icon here. Okay, I'll do that for you later on anyway. I'm making a lot of promises about things I'll do later on, but make sure you hold me to my word. Okay, so the first thing on my list is to add additional sheets. Now there's a couple of different ways of doing this. So using my demo file that I have here, I can add a new sheet either by right-clicking on an existing sheet or by clicking the Insert New Sheet icon here, in the same way that you do it in Excel. So if I click that, it adds a new sheet. When I add a new sheet, by default, it shows exactly the way you see it here, and it says Insert a New Analysis. At the moment, I only have one query, and it's the one that's selected here. So when I insert a new analysis, it will be based on that query. If I had 2 queries here, the new analysis would be based on whatever query is selected in that list. Okay, so I have 2 sheets now with tables in them. I think the other 2 sheets are actually blank. So I'll just work off sheet 1 for the moment. So what I want to do is add a second analysis to this. But if I go to the Insert tab, I have a number of options here. So I can insert a new table as either an analysis or a sub-analysis. Now the difference is, if I insert an analysis into this window, it will insert a new table, but that table is independent of the existing table. Whereas if I insert a sub-analysis, then it inserts a new table which is dependent upon this existing table. Now, if I insert a chart, and you can see the different types of charts here, so we've various column charts, we've a line chart, we've a pie chart, and we've various bar charts, and then we've a few other bubble and box and waterfall charts and so on. So I'm going to insert a sub-analysis, but I'm not going to insert a table, because by default, if I insert a chart, it will be a sub-analysis. So I'll do that, and we get this. So it's simply a single click, and it created this. And I can see at the moment, a number of things. The first is that it's allowing me to preview 3 charts of the existing range. Now I'm going to close the layout panel just to give me more room. Okay, and I'll widen it to show 5 charts. Okay, and if you want to look at more recent data, you can move that slider across and we see everything up to, in this case, period 8. So I think that's the end. Oh no, period 10 now. So you have little areas at either end to scroll to periods or whatever it may be that you can't see. The other thing that I notice is most of my charts have this little triangular warning icon. Now, I know that that's because if I look at the data here, there's a lot of negative figures and it's unable to plot them properly in a chart if the other figures are all positive. Okay. Now, that's a sub-analysis. A few other bits and pieces. There's 2 little icons over here on the right-hand side of my analysis. If I click, my sub-analysis. If I click this first icon, which is a little rectangle, it maximizes that analysis to take the window. And then I can click the restore icon to bring it back to its original size. The second icon is this little X, which allows me to delete that sub-analysis. Okay, cool. Now, if I jump back to my test sheet, this one we saw earlier, there's 3 sub-analyses to this. So I'm going to do that with this one here. So I'm going to just add in a column chart. We get it there. I'm going to add in a pie chart, and I get it there. And I'm going to add in a line chart, and I get it there. Now, these 3 charts are all dependent on this analysis. The most amount of components I can have in a single sheet is 4. So I've used up my allocation now. But if the artist inside me decides, well, I want the column chart over where the pie chart is, and I want the pie chart where the column chart is, well, I simply drag the title bar, the dark area with the writing, and drag and drop, and it should swap them. Simple, as they say. Okay, so if I'm just trying to catch up with my notes. So if I decide I don't like the pie charts because it's giving me too many warnings, and what I want to do is change it to a waterfall chart, well, the easiest way is to use the switch to option. So I select the analysis that I want to change, the analysis or sub-analysis, and in this case, I'm going to change my chart, my pie chart to a waterfall, and hopefully this works. Now, didn't like that, so I will undo and change it to a different type. I'll change it to, I'll just go to a clustered bar. Okay, it's not really behaving itself for me. Let's do it again. There we go. Okay, so the switch to option on the insert tab allows me to change a table to a chart, or a chart to a table, or a chart to a different type of chart. Now, the next option that I want to show you is this auto update. So if I select a number of, I'll select periods 1, 4, and 5, and I'm holding the control key as I click on them, and then I right click and choose keep members. It will filter the table, but as you can see, it's also causing that effect on the charts. I never like seeing those errors, so let's refresh this and see if it resolves itself. But anyway, those 3 charts should have updated to reflect the change in the parent. Okay, I'll go back to my test and do it. So the auto update, let me see, I'll put a filter in this. Actually, it might be easier with this, just one chart. So I will filter the year and period in this. To show periods 4, 5, 6, and 7. And what should happen is, not that, what should happen is that the sub-analysis should automatically update. Now, I'm going to show you the auto update button. I just need to create a new analysis. But what did I go with? I'll just go with an AR report. Okay. Now, apologies for these technical issues. I'm going to blame it on somebody else. Not sure who, but I'll find someone. Okay, so okay, we've actually plenty of years there, so I'm just going to throw in a pie chart, sub-analysis. And I'll swap. Unless I only do one. Okay, maybe item status. Hopefully there's a few multiples. No, there's not. Now, a question came in about will the charts export when you export the analysis? The answer is yes, they will. Now, they will export as, I think it's as images. So I can do that in a moment. Okay, we have multiple charts here. I'll come back to that question in a moment. So, as you saw a minute ago, excluding the fact that there was an error, when I run this, if I filter for, let's say, particular fiscal years or terms of payment, the charts should automatically update. So what I'll do is I will change I'll filter just for a few FY19 periods. Okay, and it worked, and it didn't crash, and I'm very happy now. So, if I turn off auto update, this button over on the right-hand side, it's now introduced this refresh button. The whole idea behind this is that you can do multiple changes without it refreshing each time, and I've worked on systems outside of Arista in the past where you could be waiting ages for each change that you're glad to have an option like this. Now, if I change those three, so we should see a change in the charts once I turn off on auto update. So as you can see, the whole area is darkened. It's not changing. So I could do multiple changes here. So I'm going to change the terms of payment, and I'm going to get rid of the hash. And let me see, I don't know, I'll just get rid of some random ones. Okay, so I've filtered my terms of payment and my periods, but the components haven't updated yet. Now I could click this to update without turning back on the auto update, but I'm going to turn on the auto update. So what should happen is they change. So the whole purpose behind that is to save you the stress of it refreshing each time you make a small little change, and then you can run them as one larger change. Okay, so I'm going to add another query to this. I said I would, so I'm going to bring in a commercial query called the GTN query, and you should see it in this area in a moment. So I'll leave it with those parameters. One moment. Okay, now it hasn't done anything else, so I'm going to go to sheet 2, and because the profitability analysis, the commercial query is selected, I click insert a new analysis, and it's going to feed off that guy, as you can see here. Now I will filter for net sales, and I will filter for fiscal year and period, and customer group 1. Okay, perfect. And like before, I'm going to throw in a few charts. Now, you're probably delighted with this, and it's worked so far, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed here. What I want to show you is a thing called linked analysis. So if I go to the display tab, sorry, I beg your pardon. What we are looking at is a thing called linked analysis. But I want to show you a thing called focused analysis. Now, I want to zone in on the sales for period 2 to period 5 for food service and intercompany. Okay, so I'm going to select those like that. Now, this focused analysis button has become enabled. So if I click that guy, my charts update to reflect the selection. And then I decide, hang on a second, this looks odd, so I'm going to check these values, and it updates. And I could do it for one period, or that, or whatever. I could have hours of fun here, is what I'm saying. And if you want to compare them all together, just widen it. So my 2 periods with 3 customer groups, as you can see there. Okay, if I wanted to, I could unlink the sub-analysis. Now, I'm going to go back to sheet 1 and explain this. So, at the moment, this is my accounts receivable report. I know it's filtered and so on, but if I make a change to the main table, that change is reflected in the chart, because the chart is what's called a sub-analysis to this table analysis. But this unlink sub-analysis button, which if I click on a sub-analysis becomes enabled, it allows me to break the relationship between the two. So if I click unlink sub-analysis, you can see this guy is changing, and it's taken out the text sub-analysis 1. Now, I'm going to take terms of payment out of that table just to show a change, but the chart didn't change. Now, if I go back to my commercial report, at the moment, we are looking at, I'll do it just for retail and food service for periods 4 to period 7. Okay? If I unlink the sub-analysis now, it separates them, but it doesn't restore the sub-analysis back to kind of all 4 customer groups and all 10 periods. It leaves it at 2 customer groups and whatever it is, 4 periods. And it's done that using filters. So I could change those filters if I so wished. Okay, so that's what's called a focused analysis. The other thing about a focused analysis is with a focused analysis, you're zoning in on the data. Because I've broken the relationship, there's no sub-analysis to zone in, because this guy is now an independent analysis. The terminology may be confusing, but this guy is no longer a child to this one. The unlink sub-analysis option, which breaks the relationship between the two, once I break that relationship, it's gone. Now, I do have the option at the moment to undo that change. But if I was, for example, to save this file, close it, it's gone forever. So just go under the assumption that undo is there if you make a mistake, but if you intentionally do it, you can't really intentionally put it back. You'd have to recreate the chart. Okay, so for the moment, I'm actually going to, let me see, I'm going to copy this and paste that chart into sheet 3. So it's a simple copy and paste, and it should work its magic now. Okay, what I'm going to move on to is, and if I go back to sheet 2, simply to get rid of the charts here, and there's a method to my madness. So I'm left with just a table, so there's no confusion here as to what I'm looking at. And I'll hide that guy. Okay, what I want to show you is the properties for tables, and then I'll move on to the properties for charts. So over here, we have 3 buttons, as Stephen mentioned last week. The first is the option to view the various data fields and connections. So click that, that panel disappears, click it, it comes back. Now, the third button is an option to show us a document outline, and it's listing off everything on each of the different sheets. It's the middle button that I'm interested in at the moment, and that is the properties of whatever's currently selected. So if I widen it, I can see that my visualization is a cross tab. Excuse me. It's based on that connection. I can see when it was last refreshed. I can change the name. So I'm just going to say sales, maybe net sales in FY19. Okay. Now, if I want to apply that, I click the apply button, and you'll see the title here change. Woohoo. I can also add a description, so you can put whatever description you want in there. I can set the width of the columns here. So if I change it to 150 and then click apply. Now I don't need to click apply after each change. I'm just clicking it to demonstrate that change. I can make all my changes and then click apply. Okay, so it's probably too wide for the moment, so I leave it at 100. I can make the rows taller or shorter. If I make the column narrower, so let's say 70, I can't see the year in my period and year. So if I tick wrap column text, it's wrapped it. Okay. Now I'll change it back to 100. I can also tell it to highlight totals. Now I haven't shown you totals yet, so maybe now is a good time to do it. So if I click on my customer group, so I'll just click on the data here. On the display tab, the totals option appears. This just lets me decide whether I want to see the total at the top or bottom or before or after columns. If I want a total for retail, I right-click on customer group. I right-click on customer group, go to totals, and then choose show total. And there we go. Now it's at the top because I told it to be before members, so I'll choose after, which is the intuitive area for a total. Now it's in yellow and it's bold. If I untick this option down here and click apply, it's no longer in yellow and bold. Personally, I think it looks better dressed up. It stands out. If we were using conditional formatting, or if we were to format the cell values, you would see it there. But if I untick it, it won't show the formatting on the values. So I'll put that back in. Okay. Now I mentioned about totals just for customer group. If I was to right-click on one of my periods and go totals and show totals, we would see the total at the end of each row. It adds up each of the periods. Okay, so that's the properties for our table. If I go to the chart, and because of the nature of charts, we have a few extra options here. So again, this is, well, it's net sales for retail and food service and so on. So I'm just going to put gibberish. I'll put my description in. So I'll apply that and we'll see that change. Okay, let's continue. So the style, I'm just thinking I probably would be better off having a bit more data. So I'm going to add in all the other customer groups just to have more color. Okay, and you'll understand why in a moment. So first of all, the style. So at the moment I'm using the default style, but let's go to shadow and click apply. So it gives us a kind of, it's almost like a three-dimensional effect to our charts. Or I could go to presentation, which gives us that. And hold your breath. Let's go with presentation shadow. There we go. Personally, I'm old school. I'll stick with the default. Now, in terms of the color palette, we're using the default, but I'm going to just pick something different. I'll go with rose. And there you go. I would point out, I think it's probably a good time to mention that if you're using charts, be conscious of people who are colorblind. So if people, I think, is it more men are colorblind than women? And I can't remember if it's green or red they have difficulty seeing. Maybe somebody out there knows, but it's neither here nor there. Generally, charts aren't a good way of representing things or representing data if it really requires the use of color. So I'll reset it back, or I'll change it to spectrum. Yay. Okay, and then we can change the font to, I don't know, Ming Liu. I can show the totals, so apply that, which it's already doing anyway. I could get it to show the hierarchical labeling. Don't think anything changed there. I could hide the legend over here, which I think I'll leave for the moment, and manually hide chart labels. Okay. Anyway, a lot of these I wouldn't even bother with, to be honest. I generally will leave my charts in the factory format. Okay. I'm sure you're all in awe at the moment, but anyhow, we're getting through it quite quickly. I've looked at the auto update, so I will jump back to my table. The next item on my list is a thing related to the table axes. So staying on the display tab, over here I have this swap axes button, which will swap the periods down to the rows area and the customers over to the columns area. So, bingo. Doesn't take that much effort. Obviously, with a chart, if I click swap axes, we get that. So it's now just representing the periods against each of the customer groups, rather than the customer groups by period. Okay. Now, if you don't like it, just click it again and it should revert back. Or click undo. Okay, the next option that I have on my list is to insert totals, which I've already shown you, but just if you want to remove totals, now it can be frustrating sometimes trying to, if you have several, I'll show you what I mean, if you have several fields, each with a set of totals, and sometimes you aren't sure which one to introduce. So I've customer group 1, 2, and 4. Now, if I right click on customer, if I want a total at the bottom of each customer group 2. So below grocery multiple and so on. If I right click on customer group 2 and choose totals and then show totals, what happens is I get it at the bottom of all the customer group 2 for that customer group 1, which isn't exactly what I was looking for. I want all the grocery multiple totaled up, then all the convenience totaled up. So what you actually do is, I'll just get rid of that guy. If you right click on the next field in the list, in this case it's the customer group 4, and choose show totals, it gives me a total for each of my customer group 2s, like so. But if you're not sure, try it. If you don't like it, just remove it and then try it with another field. You'll get the gist fairly quick. Okay, now I'm actually going to take that out because it's becoming very mixed up. Okay, a few other bits and pieces. So if we look at the tab on the ribbon here, the next option is this hierarchy. This allows us to compact our rows or columns. It's nothing really to do with, let's say, a customer hierarchy or anything like that. But if I choose compact displays in rows, it folds everything down, and I can see there's my retail and food service and so on, and it opens out. Okay, now I'm going to get rid of that anyway. I want the way it was. The next option on my list is the measure format. Now, if I click measure format, this allows me to override the BW or the SAP format for my numbers. Now, at the moment, I haven't a measure selected. A measure, if you forget, is one of your metrics. So net sales, quantity in kilos, and so on. So I'm going to jump down to net sales. And at the moment, I can use the option, the number format provided by the server, or I could decide to use my own format. So I'm going to go with 0 decimal places. I want a 1,000 separator, but I want it formatted to the thousands. So instead of this number here, 198,189.90, I'm going to format it to the 1,000. So you'll see that come through now. Sorry, did I need to double check what I chose there. Okay. Sorry, it's thousands, not thousandths. It would help if I read it properly. So it's 198K. So it's a way of shortening the figures. Just, it's purely aesthetics. It's still, it's still represented 198,910 or whatever it was. Okay. The next option then, I'm actually going to remove that formatting. So I'll go with server, and it should go back to the way it was. Okay, now, at the moment, all of my data has values. So let's go back to one of the ones that didn't. So this, hopefully this guy is still responding to me, but there's blank, this column here is blank. Now, there's an option on the display tab to suppress nulls and zeros. So at the moment, it's going to show all nulls, which effectively are like blanks or zeros. So I'm going to hide all the nulls and zeros in a column. So effectively, if a whole column is blank, it will hide that column. Or if there's zeros in it. If it's comprised of blanks or zeros, or both. If there's a number at all in that column, then it won't remove it. So you can see the way that's gone. If there was any rows there that were completely blank or contained zero, either blank, zero, or a combination of both, then hide in a row will hide that row. If a number was to appear in that row in the future, let's say for argument's sake the number 7 was to appear, then it would show the row. Okay. So, nearly there. Give you some of your lunch break back. I'll jump back to my demo. There's a few other bits and pieces on this ribbon. The first is this currency translation. Now, at the moment, we're looking at figures in euros, and I know there's people here from there's people listening in from the UK, from France, from Poland, and so on. Well, France, you're okay with your euros, but even let's say you want Danish krona or whatever, American dollars, this currency translation is not the tool to use. There are tools. If I was to refresh this report with the prompt, I can choose a currency here, and that's the guy I will use. It will use the built-in currency FX rates, whereas the option under this button isn't configured to use them, so I don't know what it's going to give you. There's no way you can stand over that. Okay. So, I just wanted to mention something else that kind of came up during the week. So, at the moment, we're looking at customer group and periods. So, if I go to fiscal year period, I can see there's a plus beside it here. And I'm going to bring in my data panel, or my layout panel. But if I open that fiscal year and period, this is really not what I wanted to happen. Okay, let's go to the new one. That's the one I wanted. Okay, so fiscal year and period, and I open the plus. There's an item here called attributes, and if I open that, I can get the fiscal year, the posting period, and so on. So there's extra information hidden underneath this. This is also available in the analysis for Excel and Bex Analyzer that you may have used. So let's have a look at customer group 4. Customer group 4, not hierarchy. So some of the, okay, so there's none there for customer group 4. The other thing that Stephen mentioned last week, and it came up in a question to me during the week, is how do you save the filter? So it's just something I want to do very quickly. So what I'm going to do is filter for any customer that, I don't know, I'll pick customers that have a C in their name. So, Coup de Pas, McDonald's, and that's it. Now, I want to save this filter as C customers. Okay? And then I'm going to run that, but I'll remove the filter in a moment. So, as you can see, it's filtered for the 2 customers containing the C. Now, I'm going to remove that, so I'll select everything. And we're back to the way we were. But hidden in customer group 4, there's now a plus here, which wasn't there a second ago, and it has this favorite filters guy. If I open that, I can see my C customers, and I can drag that in to the rows area, which means I'm effectively dragging in customer group 4 filtered into the rows area, and it should give us that. Bingo. Okay. Okay, I think I've kind of covered everything that I wanted to go through. For some reason, this has decided to appear at the moment. This guy often appears if the toolbar isn't long enough, but I think in this case it actually is long enough, and it's just showing it. Other options, we've gone through them between last week and this week, so we've looked at all our tabs. It's really a case of just playing with the knowledge now and becoming more experienced with it. But if you do have any questions, obviously the BI team, myself, Stephen, Mark, Dominic, and Jeff we're here to answer any questions and here to help. But I suppose the last thing I'll do is just save my work as that. Okay. Is there any questions? There's the chat panel over here. Okay, sorry, there was a question earlier about charts. Now, I can't remember, did we look at this last week? So if I export a chart, so I'll export to Excel, I'll choose to export everything, and I'll get it to, for the tables, I'll get it to repeat the outer header members, and that allows me to use Excel's auto filter on the data. Sure, I'll tick everything. Why not? So it should create a new workbook with 3 sheets, and I'll zone in on sheet 3, which contains that chart. So where are you gone? Okay, so sheet 1 is this, and then there's obviously an analysis with sheet 1. That's the information behind it. There's a copy of it. Now, so there's a chart, and there's net sales. Okay, so this is the one I wanted to jump to. As you can see, it's exported my charts, but these are not charts. This is a picture. It's in the same way that a photograph of a tree is a picture. I can't do anything with this. If I change the data on whatever sheet it was, so if I change that to 4, it is not going to update the chart. They're not. The photograph has nothing to do with the data anymore. Okay, so hopefully that answers that question. Is there any other questions? You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, well, as I say, if I'll stay on the line for another minute or two. If anybody has any more questions, you can ask it in the chat panel. You can drop us an email or phone us or whatever. But other than that, I think the only thing left for me to say really is to thank you all for giving us your time. We do have another session next week on Lumira, which is another visualization tool through the Business Objects web portal. Hopefully you can all make it, but again, thank you for your time today. Hopefully you learned something new, or at least hopefully you were able to put up with my voice for the last 50 minutes or so. But enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks a million.